Good morning, students. Today we will read how America was made a colony and how it freed itself and created the world's first written constitution. I hope you all make short notes so that it can easy for you at the time of the revision. American War of Independence. The late 15th and the 16th century constitute a fascinating chapter in the history of the world. The period was marked by the growth of the Renaissance encouraged the spirit of inquiry, the scientific temper, and the curiosity to make the known, the spirit of advantage to explore the unexplored. This process helped the discovery of the America in the geographical map of the world, developed a British colony in 1776, American began had the Great War of Independence. The American War of Independence symbolized not only the separate identity of the 13 colonies, but also served as experimental ground for new political ideologies and the institutions. So now we can start the introduction. American Revolution, also called the War of American Independence, which culminated with the winning of political independence by the 13 Great Britain North Americans colonies and forming of the United States and American between the 1775 to the 1783. This war continued in the decade, the rising estrangement between the British and the large section of the North American colonies. This was caused by the British attempts to declare greater dominance over colonial relationship after having long adhered the strategy of solitary linkage. Starting the Stamp Act Congress in 1765, members of the American Colonial Society argued the position of no taxation without the representation, denying the power of the British Parliament to tax them and they lacked member in the governing body. During the Boston Tea Party 1773, which patriots shattered the spirit of the taxed tea. When the ruler's army attempted to capture the destroy colonial military supplies and executed and the Carnot on the April 19, 1775, then tension erupted into battle between patriot militia and the British regulars. Thus, the patriots fought the British and the loyalists, and the conflict then developed into a global war. In history, it was known as the American Revolution or the America War of Independence. How did Britain start ruling the America? Before the 1492, the entire focus on the history was limited to the Old World. It contained the whole of the world's landmass without the Americans, isolated from the major cultures and the civilization of the Old World. The chapter began the sea route America was discovered by the Christopher Columbus in 1942. Northern America prominent among them the Spain, Holland, France, and England established the colonies in the European powers. The colonies were populated mainly by the European migrants who were the landless peasants for facing religion, persecution, traders, explorers seeking advantage profit on these newfound lands. These powers were looked the conflict across the globe, new threat in the war and the inaugurated in the Americans. The rivalry was strong between the England and the France, which named the ultimate known as the 7 Years' War between the 1756 and 63. It is known as the first true world war was fought in the Europe, West Africa, Americans, Indians, and the Philippines. The war concluded with the Battle of the Wandiwash, decided the British victory, British supremacy across the globe. Both parties signed in the Treaty of Paris 1763, bringing the end of the war. Condition of the American colonies. With the time the new industry were set up the producing wool, flax, leather, mostly the European market. The colonies had the diverse population and the majority of them were the independence farmer. However, nature of the economic was the variant in them the fishing, shipbuilding and the allied industries grew in the north while the plantation agriculture thrived in the south. Later divide growth in the north, industrialization further of the south, lapsing into the feudal economic power. Politically, the colonies were governed by the locally elected assembly, the enacted laws and the revised taxes. Ultimately answerable to the mother country Britain, though Britain was ruled by the parliament, secondary treatment was meted out in the people of America. This led to widespread discontentment and provided a fertile ground on the rebel ideas to grow the prosperous idea from the areas. Causes of the American War. Defective administration. In the American colonies, the administrative system of England was totally defective. Each colony had its assembly and they choose a member, but the nominating governor to each colony by the British Parliament became the integral on the part of the colonies. Numerous times conflict between the governors and they choose representatives of the different colonies became the invisible. Without the permission of the British Parliament, the governors did not do anything. Thus, the British Parliament was controlling the administrative system of each colony. The colony problem was not recognized by the British Parliament. Thus, it was the intolerable colonists who raised their voice against the maladministration of British. The American demands were continuously neglected by the British politics and were not allowed with the legal answer. Restriction on the colonial trade. The colonial trade in America was regulated by the British government of her own benefit. Prior to the Navigation Act of 1660, the colonists received the finished goods from the England only by exporting the raw material in the England. But when the Navigation Act was reintroduced, the Americans were forbidden for export their native products directly to the European country. They could import their the essential commodities only through England from the other nation. The British Parliament threatened the Molasses Act in order to impose the more tax on the colonial import. Due to the act, the colonies of the American were allowed to the import molasses only from the British West Indies. By these colonists annoyed and became the revolutionary influence of the Seven-Year War, fought between the England and the France. 1756, the 7 Years War started and continued till the 1763. It had an impact on the American colonies. Since this war had been the costly, England had to borrow quite the huge amount of the money from the other countries to fight the war. The national debt of the England rose the national high due to this. In such a situation, the England government wanted the Americans to pay the part of the debt as the amount had been borrowed for their defense. But the Americans refused to pay any amount whatsoever. They pleased that when England had been making considerable profits by the monopolizing the American trade, it was the responsibility of the English government to pay the colonial defense. But the English government did not take into account this play of the Americans. They made attempts to got money from the colonies through some other means, thereby they excited the resistment in the colonies against the consequences of the French and the Britain, the Seven-Year Wars. The special effect of the French and the Indian War became that clear and the conflict escalated. First, American generals and the soldiers had gained military experience and knowledge during the war. George Washington had clearly developed military leadership skills. The American colonists then know that the British army was not powerful to be defeated. Secondly, France was very distressed about losing the French and the Indian War. Their desire for a revenge influenced France's decision to be the follower with the Americans during the American Revolution. French had helped to make the American defeat the British. 1763 Proclamation. It came to the forbidden American colonies for setting down west. All the colonists who had already crossed the region were divided to establish Ohio. British decided to protect their colonies from the Spain attacks France on Native American tribes. The Continuing Act, which was a past, started that the colonies had to help the support troops stayed in America by supplying living quarter and the candles and the extraordinary. The Sugar Act in 1764. This act was suggested to the Prime Minister Grenville, who left the colonies should help pay the debt brought by the French and the Indian War. The act placed duties on the molasses and the sugar. It was not only the Parliament passed this tax that suffered the colonists, however, that the British took great strides in the enforcing this law. The British would stop the search colonial ships for trafficking goods. Taxation without representation was the main slogan of the American revolutionists. Was brought through the ideas of Samuel Adams and the Jones Otis in the reaction to this tax and the noise from the of the colonies. Stamp Act 1765. In the March 1765, the Stamp Act was passed by the Parliament, persuaded by the great Prime Minister George Grenville, which show the seeds of the increased tension. As per the Stamp Act, the colonists purchased particular stamp paper for each legal document, license, newspaper, pamphlet, and the almanac. It also forced particular stamp duties on the parcels for playing cards and the dice. Colonists disobeyed. They were to the attempt in the wise and madly courts where convictions were the probable. Refusal to buy these stamps would mean jail time for the fine for the colonists. The reaction to the Stamp Act was loud since the colonists refused those goods or simply refused to buy the stamp. That led to the demand the British merchant abolished law and Parliament did away within some days. The Township Act. These were not like the Stamp Act, which was the direct tax. This was the indirect tax, known as the Township Act. Just after one of the repeal of the Stamp Act, a new method was adopted by the Charles Townshend, the leader government minister, to gain the revenue from the American colonies. His project revenue laws passed by the Parliament in 1767 became known as the Townshend Act. The act levied duties on the import material like glass, lead, paint, and the paper as they came to know the colonists from the Britain. As the result of the acts, a tree penny tax was laid on the tree, the most popular tree in the colonies. With rage and the well-organized resistance, the colonists reacted. They protested with the slogan "No taxation without representation" boycott was started, and they support use things which were tax applied. The Boston Massacre in the 1776 was a landmark event in the American War of Independence. The Boston Massacre was a street fight and that occurred in the March 5, 1770 between a patriotic mob and a squad British soldiers throwing snowballs, stones, and sticks. Several colonists were killed by this. The colonists increasingly unwelcome the presence of British troops in the city of Boston. The 50 citizens were um, attacked. A British seneschal and the riot began. The soldiers, led by the British officer Thomas Preston, were threatened by the colonists. So the soldiers fled into the crowd and killed three on the spot. Denver made no removal of the British and the trial of the captain, questioned his men, murder, and a town meeting was called. At the trial, two of the British soldiers were found guilty for the slaughter. The revolution soon turned into armed rebellion all through the colonies. The British Parliament passed the Act passed by the Treaty Act in the April 27, 1973. 1773. This was a bill intended to save the uncertain East India Company from bankrupted by the greatly reducing the tea duty if paid British government and thus considering de facto domination of the American tea trade. By this, all legal tea entered the colonies through the England. It permitted the East India Company to give lower duty in Britain. It also allowed its sale tea more cheaply in the colonies. Even on taxed Dutch tea, which entered the colonies unlawfully, so the smuggling was more costly than the East India tea. After the act took effect, many colonists viewed that as yet another example of a taxation tendency Princely because left an early duty on tea entering the colonies in place, while removing the duty on tea entering the England. The Boston Tea Party. Colonists revised the Tea Act set up the procedure to colonial merchant out of business made a united front against this. On December 16, 1773, the Boston Tea Party were accused by the political protests as Griffin Wharf in British Massachusetts due to imposed or taxes without the consent of British. American colonists became the very angry and dumped 342 sheets of tea imported by the British East India Company to the harbor. This event was a major turning point of disobedience to British over the colonists. Great Britain realized the American colonists would not sit peacefully with the policies and then assigned to the rejection of the Olive Branch petition. The Americans were united due to the activity of the North in 1775. All three colonies except the Georgia met at the Philadelphia. The petition associated with the Olive Branch was sent them to the British Parliament claiming the revoke of 13 acts conceived by the British Parliament since 1765. This was popularly called as the Olive Branch Partition. The course of the war. The intolerable tax. Ruler George III was infiltrated by the organized destruction of British property. He pressed Parliament to act. Parliament passed a series of laws in 1774 to punish the rebellious colonists. These laws are called the Intolerable Acts in the colonies. As the colonists had refused to pay the amnesty, one law was passed to shut down Boston Harbor. The Quarantine Act was also passed, which allowed British commanders to house soldiers in the unoccupied private homes and other buildings. First Continental Congress was assembled where the 56 delegates met in Philadelphia and draw the Declaration of Colonist Rights in the September 1774. They agreed to demand right their own affairs. The protests in Massachusetts were supported by them and they threatened that the colonists would fight back if the British used force against them. They also decided to recognize In the May 1775 demand were not fulfilled. Colonists numerous eastern New England towns stepped up military preparation just after the First Continental Congress. Firemen and the gunpowder were began to be played up by the civilian soldiers. These activities was learned by General Gage and are now prepared to the street back. Second Continental Congress. Colonial leaders convened the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia in May 1775 debate their next move. However, events continue moving quickly. Civilian soldiers and the British soldiers fought in the bloody battle outside the Boston, and unrest debate continued regarding the loyalists that divided colonists at the Second Continental Congress. Sweeping radical plan and suggested by John Adams as of Massachusetts. He projected that each colony set up its own government and that the Congress declared the colonies independent. Though the debates regarding the into June, but one thing was that the colonial militiamen were still encamped around Boston. They were recognized as the Continental Arm by the Congress. The Battle of the Bunker Hill. Now it is the north of the city and the near Bunker Hill. British General Thomas Gage decided to strike the military who had dug in the Braid's Hill. On June 17, 1775, they set up the nearly 2,400 British troops. The colonists assumed their fire until the last time and began to shoot down and advancing Red Coast. The second and then a third attack were made by the surviving British troops because of the shortage of the ammunition of the militiamen. British troops succeeded at the third assault. The Battle of Trenton. One bold stroke was hit by the Christmas night, 1760 by Washington, solving everything by boldly. He led 2,400 men in the small rowboats across the ice-choked Delaware River. By the next morning, 8 o'clock, 9 miles had been marched by the men through sleet and the snow. They reached Trenton, New Jersey, assumed by the garrison of Hamilton. Lifted into confidence by the storm, most of Hessians had drunk too much rum the night before. They were still sleeping it off. Americans killed 30 of the enemy in the surprise attack and took 918 captives and Hessians cannon. 8 days later, the Americans were relieved by another amazing victory against 200 British stationed at Princeton. Camp at Saratoga. Burgoyne's army was bowed down because of the south of the Lake Champlain swamps and the gullies as well as the thick underbrush. Even food supplies ran slow. General Houghton Gates have been appointed by the Continental Congress to command the northern department of the Continental Committee. Gates was a popular commander from all over America and New England. He gathered military. Each time his armed force clashed with the Americans. Finally, on October 17, 1777, Burgoyne was surrounded by a massed American troops at Saratoga, but he surrendered his battered army to General Gates. Paris of Treaty. Treaty of Paris. In 1782, peace talks began in Paris. The negotiations were joined by the representatives of the four nations, United States, Great Britain, France, and Spain. Britain was interested in avoiding giving America completely independence, though France supported American independence, but he was afraid of Americans becoming a foremost power in the European country. Spain was interested in acquiring the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. The meetings observers expected the savvy European diplomats to outwit the Americans at a bargaining table, but at the team of the negotiators, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and the John Jay of New York were chosen by the Continental Congress. Before any other negotiation began, the three together demanded that Britain recognize American independence. The talk officially opened once Britain agreed to the full independence. The delegates signed the Treaty of Paris in September 1723. This treaty set the boundaries of the new nation and confirmed U.S. independence. Significance of the revolution. The revolution led by the establishment of a republic based on the first written constitution in the world. This was a marked contrary to the other states where monarchies were still in power. This inspired people across the world to struggle the democratic republic form of government. Establishment of federal state with the power divided between the federal governments and states. They provided a nine template for the power sharing in diverse countries that needed complex politics. Besides, there was a separation of powers between various organs of the state. Certain inalienable rights were given to the people. This limited the government against the authority of people and reduced government interference in their lives. Democracy was established, but it was found from project sections like Negroes and the women were denying voting rights. But the generated democracy had begun. It led to many uprisings of Europe, but the French Revolution began the biggest. Many generals who participated in the war were instrumental in the French Revolution. Thinkers like Thomas Paine also participated in the revolution led to the spread the modern ideas in the Europe. The most significant and long-term economic consequences was the end of the mercantilism. Declaration of Independence in 1776 granted freedom to the 13 American North colonies, which were a group of the colonies of Great Britain on the Atlantic coast of the American founded in the 17th to 18th centuries and formed the United States of America. The issue of slavery was a significant factor in influencing the Constitution of 1787. The democratic idea of the Enlightenment organized economic and the class interest influenced the founding father of the American Republic. Conclusion. The American Revolution had a profound impact on the history of the modern world in improving the template through which modern ideas could defeat oppressive regimes. The subsequent success of the USA inward arena is a testimony of how powerful is the idea of liberal democracy and emancipation of the populace. This model was successfully implemented by the many countries, especially in Europe, post-World War II. India has also learned a lot from the American experience and adopted many of these democratic principles, adding to our democratic socialist practice. So, thank you. So, students, hope you enjoy the session of the America War of Independence. Hope you learned about how how the America was a colony and how it fight for the independence itself from the created a world's first written constitution. Hope you take the advantages of this class. Thank you.